And welcome back. Well, in today's world, it's pretty easy to find examples of public people behaving badly. So how do you handle that as a parent? And how can you use those examples to teach your kids the right way to behave?
Dr. John Duffy is a clinical psychologist who specializes in parenting, families, teens, and relationships. He's also a best-selling author, speaker, podcast host. We were just talking about that, and national media personality. Great to see you again.
Yeah.
Great to see you guys.
We love it when
Great
you're
to be here.
Yeah, it's been a while. We gave you a little break during the holidays and the new year, but now we got you back, which
good to
is
be
great.
back.
Nice
Yes.
to see you. I think it's funny because when you talked to us about doing this as a topic, I thought, like we'll have to search for some examples. And a lot of people will acknowledge it's pretty easy to find examples now of adults behaving badly.
These days, it's kind of fish in a barrel. I think when we first talked about it, a lot of this news about all these people, politicians and celebrities and coaches and
Media personalities
and staff who are supposed to take care of kids. There is way too much fodder for this. But the good news is that if we as parents make use of the moment, I don't know how long this moment lasts, but we've got it now, and to talk to our kids about it and really let them talk about it as well. It's an enormous parenting opportunity, and in my lifetime, I can't think of an opportunity as rich as this one. As tragic as it is, as awful as it is, there's this opportunity to really make inroads with your kids.
Well, and how real do you get? Are you talking about the specifics of what happened or what they did? Because I often feel like they hear it anyway.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes we try and I feel like, shelter or keep things a little bit, well, obviously age appropriate, but how do you approach it? What do you say?
It's so different than it used to be, Tiffany, because we used to think we can inoculate our kids from this because we'll just turn
Shelter
off the
them.
TV. Yeah, we'll shelter them. We'll turn off the TV, turn off the radio. They'll never hear about it. That's no longer the case. So the kids actually, as young as like 7 or 8, the youngest kids I work with, they know the specifics of what happened. They're super savvy. And so to pretend that they don't, or to think we're going to protect them from it, it's folly.
Yeah.
So they may have questions about specifically like, what did this person do? What did that button in that desk, what was that for? And I think we're missing an opportunity if we don't talk to them about that. That said, we don't want our kids to feel unsafe either.
Right.
So we want to give them the tools, right, that they need to say no. You know what I mean? Because that's one opportunity we have in here is like, you have this opportunity and this power to shut that down in your life.
Two things. One question I find interesting from my kids as an example is not just what happened or are they going to get in trouble or what's going to happen to them, but things like you think about this torture case with the parents who tortured their 13 children in their own home. My kids have said, why did they do that? Why would they have kids to do that? And on a personal note, it's sad when so many people want to have children and can't conceive for whatever reason. And then you think someone's blessed with 13 children. That's a whole nother thing. But they'll say, well, why do they do that? And I think that's almost the most difficult question to answer.
Oh, it's so hard for kids who, by and large, their nature is really, really good and kind. This generation in particular, they're wonderful and they're really thoughtful. And they do ask that question, like, why would anybody get in that position? And the only answer that's reasonable is they have these unmet needs and we could get deep into this, but in short,
you would say that to a child.
Yeah, they have these unmet needs from long ago, and so they are damaged in this way. I always avoid this idea that there's, bad people because I think if
evil,
kids,
you avoid that.
I do because I think if you're brought up believing that that's the case, then I think you're always looking over your shoulder for the boogeyman, right? That there's bad people out there. And I don't want kids to feel that way, but I want them to know that this is a rare thing, and these are people who actually need help, because they have these deep unmet needs that manifest in this profound psychological disorder that causes them to do harm to other people, but how rare that is, how unlikely that is to befall them or anybody they know.
That's good, because you think the go-to answer is they're a bad person and they'll be punished. I mean, that's what you hear people saying to kids. You can, and so to actually say a little bit more of the psychology, a little bit more of the truth is very interesting as a concept.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of parents do this, do as I say, not as I do, or they're willing to talk about things that happen to them. How does that work into parenting?
Terribly.
Yeah.
Don't use it.
Right.
Don't
I think,
smoke, even though at your age I tried it.
Don't smoke,
you
but
know,
I'm gonna be lighting up right here.
right.
Yeah, right. No, I think, you know, that might have worked. Those scare tactics might have worked a generation ago. They worked for me, you know, but my son would never kind of, you know, follow my lead as far as that went. So we're missing the opportunity to model good behavior for our kids by saying, I'm the adult, I can do what I want, you have to listen to my words. Kids are too savvy to follow that, right? We know this. So
They're more advanced than we were.
Exactly.
Yeah,
They
for
are.
sure.
They are. And that's a good thing because there's this opportunity to really communicate, but they're not going to just do as you say blindly.
One of the other things, we were talking about people in the spotlight. Right now, the women gymnastics, they're in court because the person, this team doctor, has been accused of assaulting these girls. And in a conversation with adults, someone said, I don't think that would have happened if they were boys.
Oh.
And I find that type of thing particularly troubling as you think about how many boys are also victims of sexual assault. And it's not about letting somebody do that to you. So often it's a matter of the position that person has, and in this case, a physician, but it could be a lot of other types of positions that people have in a place of employment or with them in a place of athletics. It could be in a church, it could be in a school, it could be in athletics, wherever it is.
Absolutely. No, and I think there is a profound gender difference in that, not that there isn't shame affiliated with this with girls, because if you watched any of those hearings, they talk about the shame that was inflicted upon them. But for boys, there's this extra level of like bravado, and maybe physically I could have done something about this that I didn't do. And so for our boys, I think we almost have to take an extra step and tell them, you know, if something's happened to you, it does not speak to who you are as a boy, as a man. You know, you can say that something happened. And I think following the lead of a lot of these girls who are so courageous, you know, and suddenly the narrative shifts where the courage isn't in just like dealing with it, it's in like actually speaking your truth. And if boys can follow that lead, then I think they're a lot psychological healthier.
When I think because we know in that the boys report it less, you know, and that's the numbers are probably very equal or even favoring boys, but they just report it less. That's the fact.
No doubt.
But you know, I think, like you said, even the even the judge using words about how strong and courageous, and not saying victim but saying survivor. I mean, the language that we use is so important, and changing it from being weak to being strong.
Yes.
You know, all those things. So I like that you're saying don't shy away from these topics. Don't be afraid. And I think one of the things we want to address is how do you talk about it without lecturing them, so that they listen. And I know you're going to stay tuned for that, right? You're going to stick around?
I will stick around, absolutely.
Okay, so
I like that.
Yeah, so you got to stay tuned.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about lecturing, why we do it as parents. We find ourselves doing it. I know, you know they're going to tune out. How we can avoid this parent trap. That's coming up next. Stay with us. All right, we're back with Dr. John Duffy. He's a clinical psychologist. We're discussing how parents can turn real-world adult problems into teachable moments for kids. There's so much here, I think, to talk about.
There is.
I loved what you said about looking at someone, the abuser, let's say, as someone who's not evil, but that they've maybe been abused themselves or hurt in some way or have unmet needs.
Yeah.
Do you think it's good to help kids empathize even with the abuser? Because that's tough.
For a lot of kids, it's almost this automatic thing, you know, like whereas we might be more likely to say, this is a villain, this is just a bad person.
Yeah.
A lot of kids will say, well, no, I think they've probably been through something awful, and that's what drives them to these terrible acts. And I think there's something like oddly empowering about feeling that way, about recognizing like, oh yeah, we don't need to have a bad guy out there. We need to empathize with everybody. And this generation of kids is amazing in their capacity to empathize in a way that my generation certainly was not, you know? And I think that's really, really beneficial to them, because then I think they're a little empowered to recognize nobody's the bad guy. I can work with anybody. I can, the biggest bully in my class, if I understand how they operate, and kids are psychologically astute enough to try to do that, then maybe I can get through to them. Maybe I can help them out a little bit and, stop the tide a little bit. Yeah, have some impact.
So as we start to have these conversations with our kids, how do we get through to them so that they listen? Because you don't want them to tune you out. You don't want to start lecturing.
Right.
You don't want to go into a phase where all of a sudden, they're like, rolling the eyes. So how do you do this?
Right. So our initial inclination, you're right, is to lecture, right? To tell them this is how it's supposed to go. This is what you should do. This is how you should feel. And that comes from this need in us to protect our kids, right? And get information to them. If we can just take a deep breath as parents and recognize, you know what?
Hard.
It's so hard. And listen, I'm making it real easy, right? I'm talking about other people's kids, not mine.
Yeah, right?
So I'm like, you need to get this.
Right, right.
You need to understand me.
Yes, right. And this is how a lot of us were parented, right? Is that this stuff was kind of like lectured to us. It was more school at home, right? But if we can take a pause and ask our kids open-ended questions about, like, how do you feel about this? We might find like, wow, they're beyond where I am. They've got this real sophisticated wisdom about this. And then you have the luxury of saying at the end of the day, wow, I'm really proud of you. You really understand this. Now, there might be holes in what they understand, what the facts are, and you can fill in those blanks, but an open discussion over a lecture in this generation is going to win every time, because kids want their point of view to be respected and heard. And they kind of work like we do, right?
Yeah.
Like if we're being lectured to, I think we feel like, I'm out.
Yeah, right.
A lot of parents are going to hear this and they're going to go, I don't lecture my kids.
Yeah,
Right.
they don't realize
And they do. and I do it sometimes. I'm very cognizant of it because, anything over 30 seconds, even 60 seconds, you can see the tune out.
Oh, yeah.
So
the eyes glaze over.
I do it. I'm aware of it when I do it. I still sometimes do it. But for all of us who are listening to this and then we think, oh, I don't lecture my kids. How do you know if you're lecturing?
You have to have such presence of mind, because a lot of parents will come in and say, I don't lecture my kids. And then they'll pause and say, like, unless it comes to like grades. Then I'll lecture.
Then they'll give
and
you
if
the
it's curfew's an
exceptions.
issue, I will definitely lecture about that. But everything else, no. And I think if we recognize, oh, we do a lot of lecturing, and I'm not saying you have to cut it all out, because, we establish goodwill with our kids and we can afford a lecture. I'm just saying the lecture's not going to get us very far. The open discussion is going to get us so much further in terms of really what we want to accomplish as parents than a lecture ever will.
We've got very little time left, but I want to address this question because it's something I've experienced in talking about things like there's a fourth grader in our life, and he wanted to talk about smoking, and I'm pretty easy to talk to about it because I've never smoked, so it's easy for me. But my mother smokes, and so it's easy for me to say that. But if I was someone who had smoked, do you, as a parent or a step parent or someone in that child's life, talk about the fact that you did that? Or not?
Okay, so different people sitting in this seat would disagree on this.
I think this is a tough topic.
I think it's a really tough topic, but my bias almost always is share your story, because your story often has dimension to it, right? It's usually not like, yeah, I smoked and it was just great every step of the way. Like I think there's always like
so it doesn't give them permission.
No. And you want to be clear, like, I really don't want this for you. This was really a struggle for me, even if I enjoyed bits and pieces of it. But it also lends you credibility as a parent. And I don't want parents to miss the opportunity to establish goodwill with their kids. So if you're honest with your kids, you're thinking like down the road, and I always think long game when I think parenting. So if you're honest with your kids, then you know that like they'll listen to you a month from now if you're honest about smoking now. If you lie about it now, kids have this intuition like something doesn't resonate.
Yeah, they don't trust you.
Right. And then they don't trust you. And so a month from now when they need your help, they might not ask for it.
Yeah. Well, I thought that was a good, open, teachable moment, the time to have an open conversation where I could say, hey, they didn't know as much back then when talking about my mom. You guys are so much smarter now to know how bad it is for you, and use examples and things like that, almost like complimenting for those kinds of things. I think people want to hear more about what you have to say about so many of these topics. Dr. John Duffy has podcasts at drjohnduffy.com. You can also learn so much more about parenting in today's day and age and how to deal with undue anxiety as well, which is a big topic you work with. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.